This is the American Roundtable on Tough TV and the Tough TV network nationwide. Your half hour of political power. What's coming up on today's show, Bill Strickler?
Well, we're going to be talking about repealing or replacing Obamacare, which is really a big deal. So that's something that's going to affect a lot of people, Al, and we're going to be talking about that.
Also, we're talking to the author of a brand new book. It is coming out this week. How Trump Won, it's called. The Inside Story of a Revolution, with our friend Joe Pollack. He wrote the book with Larry Schweikert. We're also going to have an update for you on Trump's feud with the head of the CIA and Bernie Sanders' feud with the head of the FBI. Now, this is quite interesting goings-on in Washington. Plus, of course, we're always interested in your comments. You can always email us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/USA Roundtable. This is the American Roundtable on Tough TV and Tough TV 38. We'll see you in a moment. Welcome back to the American Roundtable. I'm Al Spry.
And I'm Bill Strickler.
Great to have you here. Obamacare replacement is ready to go, according to Donald Trump. Do you believe it? Well, I'm not quite sure yet, but, you know, I'm interested to hearing what he has to say. According to an interview, he said, quote, there will be lower numbers, much lower deductibles with the new plan. So the plan is very much formulated down to the final strokes. He said he has a plan that will be, quote, insurance for everybody. He did this interview with the Washington Post. He said, quote, we're going to have insurance for everybody. There was a philosophy in some circles that if you can't pay for it, you forget it, and you don't get it. That's not going to happen with us, unquote. And under the law, people, quote, can expect to have great health care. It will be in a much simplified form. Your thoughts, Bill?
Hey, it's very complicated, hundreds of pages. I don't know if anybody's in Congress actually read it before it was passed. So let's try to make something that's easy to deal with, costs down, and to keep the people that had a pre-existing condition, let's make sure that they're insured.
These are wise words that everyone should take heed of. Congress has taken the first step towards dismantling Obamacare. Here's what they did. Okay? They pushed through a budget that provides an early but crucial victory in the effort. The budget prevents Democrats from using a Senate filibuster to derail a bill annulling and replacing the law. It basically binds their hands. Now, you know the Republicans are in control of all 2 out of 3 of the branches of government. They got Congress, they got the presidency coming up. So what's going to happen there?
Well, the president doesn't need to sign this, the existing president, so they can do whatever they want in Congress, basically, and they don't have to have it approved. But in a week or so, or very soon, then we're going to have a Republican president anyway. But just an example, a friend of ours told me this morning that her medication will cost her $20 the last time she filled it, and she's been on Obamacare for months and months. It's going from $20 to $80.
Yeah.
So, you know, everything that was said did not necessarily come true. And I go back to, once again, saying I've always believed that Obama had good intentions. I don't think that was never a question in my mind. I didn't agree with all his policies, but I think he's a good guy.
And then before we go, soon-to-be former CIA Director Brennan strongly criticizing Donald Trump for reckless tweeting, and then Trump's response? Basically, that he suggests Brennan was a leader of the fake news movement that was trying to derail Trump. So this CIA Director is not going out. He's going out fighting, and Trump is kind of sending him along. Well, we have Larry Schweikert's partner, Joel Pollack, who wrote a book with him called How Trump Won. And we're going to be talking with Joel right here on the American Roundtable on Tough TV and Tough TV 38. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the American Roundtable on Tough TV and Tough TV 38. We have a great author here for you. He's written a book, and it's called How Trump Won, the Inside Story of a Revolution. His name is Joe Pollack, and he is calling in, and we are very happy to have him on American Roundtable. Hello, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's good work getting this book out as quickly as you did. How were you able to make that happen?
Well, I started putting something like it together while I was on the campaign trail, doing a little bit of work on it whenever I had a chance. You know, we didn't have Wi-Fi very often when we were in the air, so that offered an opportunity to write and reflect and record some of what I'd seen. So that's really where it started. And then after the election, there was a brief time where between one thing and another, I could put it away. And then Regnery Publishing, which is putting out the book, How Trump Won, combined my efforts with those of Larry Schweikart, my co-author, who took an approach to the election. His was less hands-on and more historical and data-driven. So I think it's a nice balance between the two parts of the book.
Oh, I think that's great. I think it's great to have multiple perspectives. So I take it you have a journalism background. Why don't you tell folks about yourself and your background?
I have a pretty eclectic background, I guess. Yes, I started doing journalism when I was in college. I went to Harvard, and I was the news director of the college radio station, and I did a bunch of internships for NPR and things like that. And then I got into graduate study, was going to do a degree in environmental science, but then that started to bore me a little bit, and I got back into writing and journalism, and I was a freelance journalist in South Africa for a couple of years before getting hired there as a political speechwriter. I worked for the leader of the opposition in the South African parliament for several years before coming back to the U.S. to go to law school. Went to Harvard Law School, and after that I worked for the Hudson Institute for a time, ran a campaign for Congress in Illinois, and eventually got hired by Andrew Breitbart, first actually hired as a lawyer, and then promoted, I guess you would say, to editor-in-chief. That was back in 2011, and I served in that post for 2 years before handing over to Alex Marlow, who became editor-in-chief when we moved much of our political coverage to Washington, where he is based now, and I'm the current editor-at-large, still in California, focusing on California, but also on national politics and foreign policy. So I have a bit of a diverse background, different areas, and that makes what I do pretty fun because I can weigh in on a bunch of different subjects.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, you're a pretty well-versed guy. I would say, did this Trump victory take you by surprise?
It did. You know, if you read the book, you'll notice that throughout I seemed doubtful about Trump's prospects for winning. I definitely thought he could win, which I think was a contrast to how other people on the traveling press corps saw him. I think that the press basically had written him off and didn't really think he had any chance at all. I thought he had a chance, but I also didn't think it was a good chance. I thought Hillary Clinton was still going to win, and I knew just how hard it was going to be for Trump to pick up the electoral votes he needed. The day before the election, I spoke to Frank Luntz outside a rally, or I should say at the edges of a rally in North Carolina, and I said to him, do you think Trump can win? He said, yes, he's got to win 4 states. He rattled off the 4 states. And I knew he was probably not going to win at least one of those states. So I said to him, well, how about one of the blue states? Because it became clear to me that Trump's only path to victory was going to be to pick off one of the blue states. And Frank Luntz looked at me like I was crazy. But in the end, that's what he did. That's what Trump did, in not just one blue state, but at least 3, unless if you count Ohio, it's 4. Picked off Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, these so-called Rust Belt states, and nearly won Minnesota and New Hampshire as well. So Trump really did the unthinkable, and it caught me by surprise. It didn't quite catch Larry by surprise. Larry, if you read the book, will tell you that he was predicting an even bigger Trump landslide, and the only thing that prevented Trump from scoring big and running up the score was the Access Hollywood video that came out in October, which he explains hurt Trump in particular ways, and he'll tell you in that book How Trump Won, which is out tomorrow in ebook and later in February in a paperback.
Well, this is perfect timing.
He tells you exactly where it hurt him.
We'll talk more about this, of course, and I'd like to tell you that we're on with Joel Pollack, who is with Breitbart, and he also has written a book called How Trump Won, the inside story of a revolution. We'll be right back on the American Roundtable on Tough TV.
Welcome back to American Roundtable. We have on author Joel Pollack today talking about how Trump won the election. So Joel, tell us a little bit more about that segment in November that kind of tarnished Trump a little bit.
Well, the Access Hollywood video came out just about a month before Election Day and showed Trump making some salacious comments about women when he was on an open mic on a bus, but didn't realize he was being recorded. Although whenever they put that microphone on your lapel, you have to realize that anything you say or do can be used against you. I once made the mistake, by the way, of getting mic'd up and then going to the men's room before going on a TV show. You should never do that.
So they got the full sound effects.
But yeah, hopefully not. Who knows? But anyway, the problem it really created for him was it created a sense that he was going to lose. NBC's Chuck Todd reported a month before Election Day that the election was over. He was quoting Republicans saying that, but it's clear that he shared that sentiment, and Republicans were scattering as far and fast as they could away from him. Paul Ryan had a conference call on the Monday after that story broke where he basically said to House members, if you need to cut yourself loose from the presidential nominee, go ahead. And after that, Trump said, well, now I'm finally free of the shackles that bound me to the Republican leadership, and he vowed to press on. But it really did take a chunk of his support out, and particularly among women voters. So Larry goes into that in greater detail, and I'll leave some of the details for the book. I'll leave your audience in suspense, so you got to go buy the book, How Trump Won, to read more about that. But it really did have an impact. However, it did not end up costing Trump the election. The forces in motion, it turned out, were so powerful that it would have taken much more. You know, and Rush Limbaugh, I think, has an interesting point he made often during the election, which is Trump would have had to sell out his own base in order to lose the election because his supporters were standing with him through thick and thin. He would have had to double-cross them in some way, and that never really happened. So he stuck it through, and I think his resilience attracted the admiration even of some of his opponents. The comedian Dave Chappelle said just before Election Day that he had voted early for Hillary Clinton, but that Donald Trump was the most gangsta person in politics because he just never gave up. And I think Americans are looking for that kind of leadership right now in a difficult time. Obama seemed calm. You know, Obama projected calm during the financial crisis, and I guess that's what people were looking for then. But right now people want strength, and that's what Trump is offering. So his ability to stick it through that Access Hollywood scandal was actually a very good case for his presidency.
Yeah, that would have destroyed just about anybody else, I would think, on the campaign trail. I mean, it used to take a lot less, even if you turned out you had a girlfriend, like what happened to Gary Hart some 30 years ago, destroyed his candidacy. But it seems like you're right. If you attract the base and you're able to feel like they're on your side and you're on their side, then I think you can get away with just about anything, short of murder, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you think, Joel, was Trump's greatest asset as a person that led him to win the election?
Probably his experience. Running for office is a pretty harrowing thing. Everybody's coming at you. Even if it's a very low-level office, you'll find you make a lot of enemies very quickly. The press lives to take down political candidates, especially conservatives, especially Republicans. And so you enter a jungle of danger. And Trump had a lot of experience with that in New York real estate. It's not too different. It's cutthroat, it's got a lot of unsavory characters, and everybody's trying to bring you down. But if you have been in those situations enough, you understand how to stick to your objectives and achieve them. And that's why Melania Trump supposedly said to her husband that if he ran for president, he would win, because she and others around Trump had seen him triumph in similar circumstances. It doesn't mean he's going to win every time, but it just means that he knows not to panic when things get rough. And I think the staff around him have also been through situations like that. You know, Steve Bannon from Breitbart News, where I've been lucky enough to work for the past several years, he's a former naval officer. So, you know, when you're out sweating in the Persian Gulf in the middle of the Iranian hostage crisis, which is where Steve was, you've been in some tricky situations. And I think that really helped Trump down the stretch.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe Pollack. We're going to have a little bit more from you after this, but I just wanted to let folks know it's How Trump Won, The Inside Story of a Revolution, available on Amazon tomorrow as an ebook, and then further on down the line as a hardcover. We will have more in a moment on American Roundtable, on Tough TV and Tough TV 38. Welcome back to the American Roundtable. Joel, one thing I think a lot of people are curious about, of course, now that Trump has won, is he going to stay as thin-skinned as he seems to be? He seems to be anytime anyone makes any kind of criticism, like, for instance, what happened recently at the Golden Globes, and there's been skits on SNL, and so is there something that's going to where he's going to allow these things to kind of just roll off his back a little bit? It might be in his best interest.
Well, I don't know that he's going to change. It's very difficult for people to change their character. I think that he has reacted to things like Saturday Night Live when he's perceived them to be unfair. I think part of the reason he feels that so keenly is that up until very recently, he was very much part of that crowd. He was in the entertainment industry. He was the in-group as far as Hollywood and the media were concerned. And then as soon as he ran as a Republican, or really as soon as he started challenging President Obama, he became part of the out-group. And I don't think that's going to change. I also don't think it's that worrying, because as long as his thin-skinnedness is confined to Twitter and media, that's fine. I think that the real question people had during the election, I think it's a legitimate one to ask, is whether it would translate into governing. In other words, whether he would make rash decisions based on perceptions of personal attacks and things like that. And I don't think that it has, because I think if we had real reason to fear that, we would have seen it on the campaign trail. He didn't change his campaign suddenly in response to something, for example. He kept a very steady hand when it came to managing his campaign. So I think we see that part of it is just his personality, but he understands that when it comes down to the bottom line, he has responsibilities to take care of. And that's also a clue that some of what he's doing may be deliberate, that it's not just reactive, that sometimes he's picking the targets he responds to and other times he's not. I noticed last week he gave the New York Times big credit for not publishing some of the salacious and false allegations against him that BuzzFeed and others published. And you might think, well, why is Trump being so nice to the New York Times? He also went over to the New York Times editorial office to meet their editorial board after he won the election, and every other news outlet, they had to come to him. So you might say, well, why is he doing that? He kept saying the New York Times is going to go out of business and they're a failing paper and all that stuff. Part of it is his way of negotiating with people. And so there's an element of diplomacy, however unusual, in some of these public spats.
It's interesting that you say that. We're going to take a break. But I want to have a few more questions for you, but it's interesting you say that. It is actually a negotiating technique. We'll have some final words from Joe Pollack. Really enjoying this conversation. He wrote a book with Larry Schweikert called How Trump Won, right now on American Roundtable.
Welcome back to American Roundtable. I'm Bill Strickler.
I'm Al Spry.
So let's do a little recap here on the very interesting discussion we had with Joel Pollack.
He basically concluded the interview on the side we're having some issues, but he said that that Trump thought the media was biased against him, whereas it used to be, I guess, his friend, like he said Hollywood was. Once they found out he was going to run for office, they kind of turned on him.
Well, it seems to me like he would have a very interesting book full of real facts, because he was on the inside with Trump. He was on the trail with Trump. So he's not saying per se in our conversation that he was for Trump, but it was a background going to Harvard, that he does have a journalistic mind, and I think that's really going to benefit anybody that reads his book.
It's interesting, but Bernie Sanders is actually agreeing with Trump on this point. As you know, Bernie ran as an independent campaigner and Trump, he ran as on the left and Trump ran on the right. But he basically said James Comey, the head of the FBI, has been receiving renewed scrutiny for releasing letters about Hillary Clinton's email scandal right before Election Day, if you remember that. But part of the official probe into those actions by the Department of Justice watchdog said that Bernie Sanders wondering if there might be something else. So he said that Comey should take a hard look at his role in making his next move accordingly. Quote, I think it would not be a bad thing for the American people if he did step down, unquote. Told that to This Week with George Stephanopoulos, adding that Comey's actions were outrageous and unacceptable. What do you think of that?
Well, you can always question the timing, basically, of anything. But I don't, when he released those, I don't think anybody really said that those emails were fabricated or they were fabricated by the Russians. I think that what was said in the emails, actually, they were the emails. So was the timing off? I mean, listen, you can say yes or no, but I think with Comey, it might bring, and we have to take a look, we're trying to bring the country together, and I don't see the liberals or the Democrats really trying to come together with Trump.
No, I don't either. And of course, it's interesting, of course, that Comey isn't plowing ahead with any investigations and allegations about possible ties between Trump's campaign and Russia. Reince Priebus, who is now, of course, chief of staff, incoming chief of staff for Trump, saying he doesn't foresee Comey going anywhere anyway. So I think Comey's there for at least for the while. They don't really like to change out the FBI directors too often. Well, that does it. This is another half hour of Political Power. We thank you for joining us. This is the American Roundtable. I'm Al Spry.
And I'm Bill Strickler.
We will see you next week. Until then, keep it real and keep it tough.